Okay, Andrew Jackson, Indian fighter. If you listen to the video, it stated that this militia that he was the head of was put in place to protect the citizens of Tennessee, usually against Indian attack or possibly a British invasion or a Spanish invasion if either one of those countries came back and wanted to try to take the colonies. Well, his battle is going to be at this time with Indians. And these were Indians who populated the southeastern section of the United States. So his next battle isn't going to be with the British, it's going to be with Indians who populated the southeastern section of the United States. And the Indians that he will be in conflict with will be Indians called the Red Stick Indians. Red Stick Indians. And they were actually Creek Indians. They were members of the Creek Indian tribe, but they were considered radical Creek Indians. Radical Creek Indians. And they were on the rampage. And usually if you're on the rampage and you're radical, you're upset about something, are you not? That's kind of how it works. Well, this is our first talk about Native Americans, and we'll spend a lot of time visiting about them in the future. But even back then, Indian tribes were battling white encroachment. In other words, white men coming and trying to take what was theirs. And even back this far, most of the Creek tribe in the southeastern part of the United States had finally decided, you know what, we'll accept the white ways. Some even married white men, which really caused a split in the Creek tribe, because there were those that were thinking, hey, it's time, if you can't beat them, join them. And there were others that were thinking, hey, we're not going to accept this white encroachment. Well, the ones that wouldn't accept that became known as radical Creek Indians, and they were known as the Red Stick Indians because the weapons they carried had red on the end of the stick. Well, these radical Red Stick Indians were willing to fight to the death to control their lands that they believed they owned and to battle this white encroachment all the time. And the leader of the Red Sticks, the radical Red Sticks, was William Weatherford. William Weatherford. William Weatherford. Now, does that sound like an Indian name to you?
No.
No. He actually was a member of the Creek tribe. He was 7/8 Scottish and 1/8 Creek. But he did serve his views on the radical side of things. So he was a member of the tribe, although he was 7/8 Scottish and 1/8 Creek. He believed in the radical way of life, and he led the Red Sticks. Now his warrior name, they didn't refer to him, his warriors, as William Weatherford. They referred to him as Red Eagle. His warrior name was Red Eagle, but his Christian name or birth name was William Weatherford. What's that? Red Eagle. Now, in August of 1813, these radical Red Sticks were out causing some trouble. And there happened to be a group of 550 people that were seeking refuge at Fort Mims in present-day Alabama to try to get away from the harassment of the Red Stick Indians. So in August of 1813, 550 people sought refuge at Fort Mims, which was in the Mississippi Territory, but it was in present-day Alabama. Okay? And they were seeking refuge. They wanted to get away from this harassment from these radical Red Stick Indians. Now, of these 550 people that sought refuge at Fort Mims, 300 of those were white. 300 were white. And of those 300 white people, 175 were members of militia from that area. So of the 550 people at Fort Mims seeking refuge from the Red Sticks, 300 are white, and 175 of those 300 whites were militia. The other 250 people in the group were either pure-blood Creek Indians or mixed-blood Creek Indians. So the other 250 were either pure-blood Creek Indians or mixed-blood Creek Indians. Well, just because they sought refuge at Fort Mims didn't mean they would be safe there. And what the Red Stick Indians did is for weeks they sat outside the fort waiting for the right time to attack. And finally, on August 13th of 1813, the Red Stick Indians began their assault on Fort Mims and those 550 people that were inside. So again, the Red Sticks waited outside the fort for weeks and finally attacked Fort Mims on August 30th, 1813. It was an absolute bloodbath. Men, women, and children were killed in that assault. Wiped them out in Fort Mims, and the headlines in the Eastern newspaper reported a massacre of whites by Indians. So on August 30th, 1813, the Red Sticks attacked Fort Mims with those 550 people inside. It was absolutely a bloodbath. Men, women, and children were killed. And this assault was reported back east in the Eastern newspapers as, quote, a massacre of whites by Indians. Is that true?
Sort of.
Sort of, right? Because there were 250 either mixed or pureblood Creeks in that business. You know, you're going to find out in Western history, when we start talking about Native Americans, if white people kill Indians, it's a victory. If Indians kill white people, it's a massacre. That's what you're going to, that's the bias. Anyway, this was a killing of 550 people, 300 who were white, but 250 that were not. Well, since General Jackson and his Tennessee militia were stationed closest to Fort Mims, they were called to Alabama to defeat these Red Stick Indians. So being General Jackson and his Tennessee militia were the closest outfit, so to speak, to Fort Mims, they were called to Alabama to defeat the Red Sticks. And they're going to have many different conflicts with the Red Sticks from this point on. But I want to tell you about the first conflict they had and the last one they had. And we'll start with the first one. The first conflict between General Jackson and his militia and the Red Sticks occurred. Jackson cruised to an easy victory, killing between 400 and 500 Red Sticks in the process. So the very first battle that General Jackson and his militia had with the Red Sticks was a big victory for the militia. And it was estimated that his militia killed between 400 and 500 Red Sticks, while the militia suffered minimal casualties. Minimal casualties. And after that first battle, Noah was found on the battlefield a baby who had survived. And one of the militiamen found this baby and brought it to General Jackson, a little Indian baby. And Jackson made the decision that he would adopt the boy, and he sent the child back to Nashville, where eventually he and his wife raised that child until his untimely death at the age of 15 of tuberculosis, or TB. So Jackson would later use this when he took criticism by Native Americans, but a baby was brought to him that survived the battle. He took the baby and decided to adopt the baby. The baby was sent back to Nashville, where he and his wife would raise that child until that child's untimely death at the age of 15 of tuberculosis, or TB. Well, as I mentioned, there were months of fighting in between the first battle and the last battle, and finally Jackson had set up the Red Sticks for one final win-or-go-home conflict. And that conflict will happen in the Mississippi Territory in present-day Alabama. So after months of fighting the Red Sticks, Jackson readies himself for a final conflict with the Radical Creek tribe, and the final battle against the Red Sticks will take place in the Mississippi Territory in present-day Alabama. If you look at the map here, this area that we know as Alabama and Mississippi at the time was simply the Mississippi Territory. But the battle actually took place in what we know now as present-day Alabama. And it took place at Horseshoe Bend on the Tallapoosa River. It took place at Horseshoe Bend on the Tallapoosa River. And this again was in the Mississippi Territory. So the exact battle site for this final conflict between Red Stick and militia will be fought near the Tallapoosa River at Horseshoe Bend in the Mississippi Territory. Now, if you look up at my great-looking drawing here, and this was unusual of Native Americans, at Horseshoe Bend, 1,000 Red Sticks had basically constructed a log fortification barrier that they had built that was 8 feet high, and they had portholes in them to stick their weapons out. And it was basically logs standing up. And there was a big fortification 8 feet high to protect themselves from Jackson's attack. So at Horseshoe Bend, 1,000 Red Sticks had constructed a barrier fortification, and this fortification was 8 feet high, prepared with portholes to protect themselves from attack. So how many Indians are here? 1,000. Jackson has an army of 1,500, a combination of militia and regular U.S. Army. So he is going to command 2 units, his regular Tennessee militia, and he's also going to be in command of these U.S. Army regulars that have come to his defense. Now they have a commander, someone that's in charge of them, and that might be a familiar name we'll talk about later. It was Lieutenant Sam Houston, who was the commander of the U.S. Army forces at Horseshoe Bend. However, who has overall command of both forces? Jackson. Okay? Now, not only does Jackson have 1,500 men with him, he also enlists the support of another 1,500 Indians from the Cherokee tribe, from the Choctaw tribe, and even those from the Creek tribe. All 3 tribes who cared little or nothing for these radical Red Sticks. So Jackson also enlists the support of 1,500 Indians from the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Creek tribes. So he actually is going to have a manpower of 3,000, or 3 times as many as the Red Sticks. Now, on March 27th, 1814, on March 27th of 1814, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend commences. On March 27th, 1814, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend commences. Now, a little bit of a side note here. Jackson is going to begin firing cannons at 10:30 a.m. that morning at the fortification to try to knock it over so they would have easy access. Unfortunately, that goes to no avail. They have built quite a fortification, so it doesn't have any effect. But prior to 10:30 that morning, Elisa, what do you think happened by looking at this drawing? What they do with what men? What men went 3 miles downstream and then kind of circled the fortification from behind using the river as support? Very good, those 1,500 Indians. And they started assaulting the fort from behind, which took their attention off the front, where Jackson was firing cannons. Does that make sense? So the Indians distracted the Red Sticks by attacking from the rear, and then after Jackson bombarded that fortification at 10:30 to no avail, he sent his main army in a frontal attack of the fortification. You know who led that frontal attack? Who led it? Only one or two. There's only 2 people that could lead it. Sam Houston. 50-50 chance, right?
I just asked one.
Yeah. Samuel Houston leads the charge, and this poor son of a gun, when he leads that charge, he is severely wounded. He is shot, sabred, and wounded by arrows during his initial charge at that wall. His men drag him off, expecting him to die, and he survives. And later we'll come on in history when we talk about some other issues. So Lieutenant Sam Houston leads the infantry charge at the fortification. He is shot, sabred, and wounded by arrows. He is dragged off by his men, expecting him to die, and he survives. After 5 hours of fighting, they finally breach the top of the fortification and get over the walls. After 5 hours of fighting. They finally breached the walls and forced himself across the top of the Red Stick Barrier. The Battle of Horseshoe Bend was horrific. They estimated that about 800 Indians, Red Stick Indians, were killed. About 800 Red Stick Indians were killed, and the Tallapoosa River ran red with the blood of Indians on both sides. So the loss of life was where? On the Native American part. Actually, the rear assault caused way more casualties than the frontal assault, but it was effective. It allowed Jackson to get over the walls. But they estimated that 800 Red Stick Indians were killed, and the Tallapoosa River ran red with the blood of Indians on both sides. You know how many men were killed on Jackson's side of the 1,500 he had? How many were killed?
37.
A little high.
Oh.
About a sixth of that.
Oh, like 6.
Six is all he lost. So where were the casualties? Native Americans on both sides. So Jackson's casualties included just 6 men killed. Battle's over, Jackson's back at camp. One brave, lone Red Stick Indian enters Jackson's camp offering a peace offering, a slain buck deer. His way of putting up the white flag, I guess, right? So after the battle, one lone Red Stick Indian enters Jackson's camp. He has a slain buck deer on his shoulders, and is going to bring it in as a peace offering. Who is it? We only mentioned one of them.
That's a group.
Who's the one that came in? William Weatherford, or Red Eagle. Came in, he plopped down the slain buck deer as a peace offering to General Jackson, and he said, if I had 800 more men, we'd still be fighting. Jackson has every right to shoot this guy dead on the spot if he wants to. But he doesn't. Why? He didn't come in very apologetic. He said, by God, if I had 800 more men, I'd still be fighting. What did Jackson think of that? He was brave. He was impressed. He thought he was courageous. He was a good leader. Therefore, he accepted his peace offering, honored him in defeat, and sent him out free of charge, so to speak. So Jackson was very taken back by that. He thought Weatherford showed great leadership and bravery, courage. He honored Weatherford in defeat, accepted his peace offering, and allowed him to leave unharmed. His next conflict with Indians, which we'll talk about tomorrow, will be against the Seminole Indians of Florida. And he's just going to get a kind of a start on that. But then he's going to get called to action where? Battle of New Orleans. Absolutely. Now we're not going to cover that again, obviously, because we already did it. And then we'll come back to the Indian part of it. But most of his battle, to be honest with you, with the Seminoles, is going to be after he leaves the military and becomes President of the United States. But we'll talk about his start, and then we'll talk about his political career tomorrow.
Seminoles are super cool.
Yes, sirree.